As the presidential election fast approaches, there is a rising tide of independent voters sweeping the nation. A recent poll shows 45% of Americans now identify as unaffiliated with any political party, a big move away from traditional allegiances that is reshaping the political landscape. And joining us now with charts on this is former Treasury official and Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Rattner.
Steve, thanks so much for being with us. You know, a lot of people look at this time and in the future, and they're thinking that maybe the rise and possibly fall of Donald Trump, or the rise, fall, and rise of Donald Trump is going to be the story, really the political story for the next 10, 20 years, the impact on the country. I've got to say, politically, the rise of independence, what you're looking at right now, I think will be far more significant, because it does seem that we're about to break what John Meacham has called that 150-year duopoly that has controlled American politics.
Yeah, Joe, and actually the two things I think are connected, but we'll see what everybody else thinks when I show you some numbers here. So in terms of Mika's lead-in and this whole rise of independence, let me just show to you what it looks like on a chart. If you go back to 2004, roughly an even division among Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and it has simply gone like this, like Jaws. Republicans and Democrats have ended up in the same place, although Democrats did better for a while. But now, as Mika said, independents are up to 45%. And what does this reflect? I think it reflects to a considerable degree people's unhappiness with the way our democracy operates. Only 27% of Americans believe that our system is working either well or very well. The rest think it's not working very well. There are 32 states that permit party registration. A lot actually don't. Those of us who live in those states don't really understand that, but that's the way it is. Disproportionately large number of independents in states that don't permit party registration. And all of these green states, there was an increase in independence over this period of time, from 2014 to 2024. A few states where it went down, but basically independence on the rise.
Florida.
You know, I was at a school event last night, Steve, and talked to several parents. We're just talking just in general. And talking about independence, and everybody seemed to come to the same conclusion, and I found it fascinating. They say, where's the candidate that's economically conservative, that believes the United States should be involved in the world, that believes that women should have control of their own bodies, and they just went down the list, and they were trying to make the point, their view that you're making, that you're about to make right now, I think, and that is that people are becoming more polarized, which is actually driving a lot of Americans into looking for a third choice.
Yeah, that's part of the point, that you have the parties in the hands of a smaller and smaller number of people, so inevitably it becomes the extremists. The Democrats happily have maintained, I think, a more moderate stance, but when you see what's happened in the Republicans and with Trump, you have to look at the fact that many people have left the Republican Party as part of it. But let's take a look here at the trend, because what's also happening is that the red states are getting redder and the blue states are getting bluer. So the increase in presidential registrations has moved toward blue states have gotten bluer, as I said, red states have gotten redder. There are only 4 states or 5 states that have gone the other way: Nevada and Utah, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Rhode Island have become more red, and Utah and Kansas, oddly enough, have become slightly more blue. But basically, the trend is that as party registrations move, the red states get redder, the blue states get bluer. Why does this matter? This matters because our elections are being decided in a smaller and smaller number of places. Back here in 2000, 47% of the elections by county, we're looking at this by county, were decided by 20 percentage points or less. Today, only 22% of our elections are being decided by 20 percentage points or less. That means that all the rest is 80% almost of our elections are being decided by more than 20 percentage points in a given county, which means, again, that a smaller and smaller number of voters are essentially deciding our elections because we have so many uncompetitive races.
So, Steve, your third chart looks at primary turnout, and I'm curious how you think this plays into all of this.
So given what I just said about how more and more elections are decided in fewer and fewer places, the primaries become more important. And you go back to my point about the decrease in party registration, and you combine that, and what you find is that the number of voters who can't vote in a primary because they are not registered to a party has gone from 15 million to 27 million. So these voters are effectively shut out from deciding who the nominee is, and therefore, since the nominee has become so much more important, less able to influence the outcome of an election. And then you talk about turnout. So turnout actually in general elections has gone up a bit. We've succeeded in convincing people they should vote 38% to 47%. Turnout in primaries hasn't moved at all. It's stuck down at 20%. So only 20% of Americans are voting in these primaries. In New York and Virginia, in the last primary, only 3% of people voted. And these are people deciding the nominees in states that are often not competitive. And so in effect, they're choosing the winner.
It's such an important and interesting point. Something we looked at, Steve, around Iowa when there was this shock that Donald Trump had won so big. And then you looked at it, actually, he won just over 50% of a tiny turnout among Republicans in the state of Iowa. Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Rattner bringing the heat, bringing the charts. Thanks, Steve, as always. We appreciate it. So, Sam, let's talk about the impact of a growing number of independents on a national election, which is what we're seeing right now. You kind of call the people Joe was talking to at the school event last night the normies, people who are not immersed in Twitter and cable news 24 hours a day, out living their lives, and they just want government to do things and stop the nonsense and actually get something done. What is the impact? Let's just look at this election right now. Who does Joe Biden, who does Donald Trump need to be talking to swing them?
Right. Well, I think there's like two types of independents. There's the normies, who are people who just don't want to be totally engaged in the fight 24 hours a day, who want some sort of centrist model of governance, and attitudinally, I think, just want people to chill out. Right. Those are the traditional independents. And then there's like independents who, maybe support Marjorie Taylor Greene, or maybe support RFK Jr., who, really have a sort of a weird convergence of policy interests and political interests, and maybe some sort of skepticism, vaccine for instance, that gets them involved in governments. Those are not your traditional third-party moderate and independent. So I just want to make that distinction. But both of them will have a huge impact on this election. I mean, it's possible that RFK Jr.'s candidacy will get, double-digit support potentially in many of these critical swing states, and who knows who that takes the most from. We haven't had that type of level of support since Ross Perot in the election. But yeah, I mean, for Biden and for Trump, they're going to have to contort in certain ways, I would suspect, to try to appeal to those types of voters. It's just trying to figure out which class of independents will take the most from their candidacy.